What we're going to be doing here tonight, folks, is we're going to be mounting a scope on this Remington 700. Now, this is Jay's Remington 700, and I showed you in a video last week the scope that we're going to be putting on it. It's a really nice Nikon M308. But before we can mount that, we have to get some mounting hardware on here. And what we're going to be using is a one-piece rail. Now, this one happens to be made by Weaver, and it is a 0 MOA rail set. Now, I know what a lot of you may be thinking, oh, we start off with a 20 MOA. And normally that's what we would do, but this particular scope comes with a one-piece mounting set that's already pre-angled at 20 MOA. So if we put a 20 MOA scope rail on here, that would start us out at 40, and the internal adjustments on that particular scope are only 40 MOA. So that's 20 up elevation and 20 down elevation, 40 total. And I don't think that we'd be able to compensate for that at shorter distances. Now, if you were going to set this up to be strictly long range, say 600 yards plus, or maybe even down to 500, you could probably get away with that initial setup. But we're definitely going to want to be able to zero this at much shorter distances, so we had to go with the 0 MOA rail. Now, the first thing that we need to do is that we need to make sure that the rail is going to set flat on the receiver. And if there's any space, either at the front or at the rear, we may have to bed this. And first thing we need to do is take out the little screw plugs, which I've already done, and we're just going to lay the rail on. And what I like to do is start with the front, and I'll put the front screws in. We're not going to torque them down, but we're going to see if they, if we have any space at the rear of the mount. And of course, they don't have to be torqued to specifications. And go ahead and put them both in there and just make sure they're a little snug. They don't have to, like I said, we're not going to torque them down real tight. And if there's any space at the rear, then we'll know that we'll need to bed this. And I can definitely see some space between, and there's some light coming through. So what we'll do to confirm that is take a small piece of paper, and if we can slide it under, definitely some space there. So, and you can actually see the rail itself flex when you push down on it. So we're going to have to bed the back end of this rail, and that's not a problem. So what we're going to do now, a lot of people will go ahead and they'll torque the back end of this down as well to see if they need to bed the front, but I have done this procedure many times over the years, guys. I've never had that happen. So, not to say it can't. Now, what I'm going to show you tonight, the way that we're going to do this, is a procedure that was shown to me by a really good friend of mine when I was in the Marines together with him, and he was an armorer at Quantico for many years, and he taught me this. And I've done this over the last 25 years, probably 30-40 times. And it's always gotten really good results. Now, there's a lot of different compounds and stuff that you can use. We're going to actually use JB Weld. It works very well. And so let me get everything set up, and I'll be back and I'll show you the procedure. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to prepare the surface of the receiver itself, and you want to degrease it now. Of course, I use Milcom Weapons Cleaner. It's a great degreaser. Just squirt it on there and wipe it off. I want to make sure there's any oils or any kind of shipping oil or anything like that that's off of it. I want to make sure it's a clean surface without any problem. And we're going to want to do the same thing to the rail itself. So we're going to take and squirt a little bit of that on there and make sure we get it all cleaned off really well. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we put a releasing agent on this receiver. Now, the releasing agent, basically, it keeps the JB Weld from actually sticking to the receiver of the gun. If you put it on there without it, yeah, you're pretty much hosed. And one of the best releasing agents I've ever found is just neutral shoe polish. Now, I have heard of people using like car wax, and I'm sure that works very well, but I've never tried that. Now, I'm putting this on very thick because we're going to fill in these screw holes too, and I'm just going to use the wax itself and just push it down in there, and that way not worried about there being any chance of any of that getting down into the action itself. Put it on a little thick, let it dry, and then we'll wipe it off, and we'll put on a very small coat after that. Definitely going to want to leave it down into the screw holes. Now some people use modeling clay. Had a guy I once talked to that said that he used, I think it was silly putty. So anything like that would work, and I'm sure there wouldn't be any problems with that. You just want to make sure that it doesn't get down into those screw holes, because then you would end up having to probably take it to a gunsmith and have it retapped or something along those lines. Well, once that's off there, we're just going to put a very, very thin coat on there just to make sure that we don't have any problems with it sticking. And I think we'll be okay from here. Make sure that there's plenty down in that screw hole itself. Okay, we've got our JB Weld on. I've just put it onto a paper plate. You can do a piece of cardboard or anything, and just use equal amounts and just mix it up. The steel is the dark or the black, and the hardener is the light gray. And you just kind of mix it up till it comes a darker gray. Make sure it's well mixed on both sides. Just take your time with it, mix it up for a few moments. I've seen some people say, well, you need to mix it up for 15 minutes or 5 minutes. No, you don't. Just mix it up real nice so you get a consistent, like a battleship gray or dark battleship gray. All right. And then from here, we're just going to put it right on the back part of this rail. Try to make it as even and consistent as possible. Doesn't have to be a lot, but you definitely want a coat on there. And don't worry about it if it goes over just a little bit, because we're gonna take care of that. Okay, set this to the side. And next thing that we want to do is we want to put our rail down on the receiver itself. Try to line up the front screw holes as best you can. See if I can get this angled in here for you a little bit better. My arm will probably be in the way, but I'll try to stay out of it as much as possible. And we're going to hold up the back end of this until we get our screws started in the front, because we don't want this moving around any more than is necessary. Okay. Now we'll start our second screw. And then we'll slowly let it come down. Pushing forward on it as much as possible. And I'll explain why in just a moment. And if we've done it right, you're going to see some of it come out just on the edges. And we definitely do have that going on. Okay. Let me see if I can get you some close-ups of that. Hang on just a second. Okay, if you can see right there, just a little bit, if it'll focus in for us, see where it's kind of come out just a little bit around the edges, a little bit there at the back, and the other side is the same way, and that's what we're wanting to do. Now, what we've done is when we pushed forward on this rail and we tighten these down, and they are not tightened to specs, we'll do that at another time, but when we push forward on the rail, the purpose for that was because as you shoot the rifle's going to want to go backwards. Everything that's on it, the scope, the rail, anything else, is kind of want to stay where it's at. Okay? If we push forward on this, that puts as little stress as possible on these screws, and so you're wanting everything. When we get ready to torque it down to specs, you'll see where we'll do that again. We'll push it forward and then torque the screws to specs. And that's in everything you want to do. The scope mounting itself, if you use rings, you're always going to want to make sure they're forward when you tighten them down. And that's to take as much stress off of those screws as possible when that rifle fires. So let's get this back up. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to clean this edge off before it dries, and we'll let it sit for a while. Hang on just a second. Okay, now what we're going to want to do is we're going to take a Q-tip and we're going to spray it down. I use Ballistol. A lot of people use other things. WD-40 works well. I've heard CLP does. You want to kind of spray that down just a little bit. And the purpose for that is we're going to wipe as much of this off as we can because we don't want any extra on the receiver. And this kind of helps to clean up a little bit better. You don't have to worry about it getting underneath the rail or anything like that. And it works pretty well. We only use about one Q-tip or one swipe. I don't want to use a lot. You can do this without using Ballistol or anything, but it tends to smear a little bit if you do that. So don't worry about going through a bunch of Q-tips here. If you need to, go right ahead. And we'll just make sure that it's off. Now, like I said, I mean, this just kind of helps get it off a little bit better without it smearing as bad. You can use one side of the Q-tip and then the other. And left down here on this plate. I'm going to do the back side the same way. Because the more cleanup that you do now, the better off you're going to be whenever it completely dries. And we'll go into the front of the lug as well, just to make sure there's nothing here. And there we go, we should be in good shape. Now what we'll do is we'll let this thing sit, probably guys, for about 5, maybe 6 hours. Let's back out a little bit. And what this will do, this is the initial cure of it. Just we won't mess with it. We'll come back, we'll remove this, and then we'll clean out the holes, and we'll set it back on there and let it completely cure, probably overnight, or at least about 6 or 7 more hours. So we're gonna let it sit for about 5 hours, and we'll be back, and we'll pop it off, and we'll see what kind of results we got. See y'all then. Okay, folks, we're back, and it's been about 5 hours, coming close to it, 4.5, 5 hours, something like that. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our base off, our rail off here. Now, one thing I did not mention before, and I want to go ahead and mention it now. After you put this on, okay, do not press down on the back of the base, because if you do before it's cured some, you may run the risk of pressing some of the bedding material out, and you won't get a proper set. Okay, so. Once you have it set on there, and once you get these 2 screws up here tightened down, don't put any pressure on the back pressing down, as try to avoid that if you can. So we're going to take this off, and if we've done it correctly, then the base should pop off there relatively easily. I mean it's going to be stuck on there some, but we shouldn't have to work too hard to pull it off. And the bedding compound should not be on here. We may have to do some cleanup, but it should stay on the rail. So let's see what we got. Popped off. And you can see right here, we have a pretty good, nice little pad here that we've got. And you see where some of the wax has come on there. That's fine. It's not a problem. So it's kept it off of, out from underneath the base. Now, what we'll want to do here is we'll take and we'll clean up the base just a little bit. And there's nothing on it. Works really good. So the release agent did what it was supposed to do. And that looks pretty good. Now, at this particular point in time, what we want to do is we need to get, while this is still manageable, we need to get the bedding compound, or the JB weld, out of here. So what I like to do is take a drill bit that is about the proper size, which is probably going to be, yeah, about 9/64, and let's just start kind of trying to push that out. Go from the top. You should be able to turn it with your hand because it's not completely cured. You want to try to avoid turning it with a machine if possible, or with the drill bit. I'm sorry, I'm out of camera. And you can see it kind of pops through. And we do the same thing on the other end, and just kind of turn it by hand. I mean, you can actually go from the bottom if you wanted to. And it cleans out the JB weld that was up in the in the screw hole itself. And if you do this before it completely cures, you can do it by, you can turn it by hand like this, okay? And because I don't like to try to put it in the drill to do it, because once this stuff hardens up, guys, it's, I mean, it's like steel. So that's cleaned up very, very well. Now what I'll do is I'll take a way oversized drill bit and right by these screw holes, chamfer just ever so slightly around them till it comes down to metal. We do the same thing with this one. Gives a small little chamfer around it. And you can take some time right now and clean up anything that's left on the base that you want to do. So the next thing that we have to do, or really all that's left, is we'll get our wax out of our screw holes here, and I'll use a pipe cleaner for that. Works really, really well. And then we'll what we're going to actually do is we'll put this back on here. Okay, we'll use the screws, torque it back down, and let it finish curing. So we're only about 5 hours into the cure. We need to let it sit for another, I'm going to say another 5 or 6, probably 7 hours to get a full cure on it as much as we can. We'll let it sit overnight, and then we'll torque it down to specs, put our scope on, and then we're done. So we'll let this go ahead and cure, and then we'll be back with the scope mount when we get finished. See y'all in a bit. Been about 24 hours since we put our JB weld on here for our pad, for our bedding material, and it's completely cured. And so the only thing really left to do here is to go ahead and torque the rail down. Now I've gone ahead and started the screws here just to save a little bit of time. And what we'll do is we'll torque them to specifications. What I like to do first, go ahead and just put those screws on until they just start to snug up a little bit. And then you're definitely going to want to have a torque set, and I use this fat wrench here, and we've got it dialed up. Now according to the documentation that came with the rail itself, it says to torque them to 20 inch-pounds. So I always want to go by what that says. And so I've got it dialed up to 20 inch-pounds. It's not foot-pounds, big difference. This is 20 inch-pounds. And so we just kind of start, and you'll turn it until it pops, and go from one end to the other. And we'll get our last one here. And we are at 20 inch-pounds. The rail is all ready to go. The only thing left to do now, guys, is to mount the scope and to sight it in and get it all ready to go. But we'll do that in another video. Hope this helps you out if you were ever wondering on how to bed one-piece rail. Hopefully this will get you in the right direction. As you can see, it's not hard to do. A little time consuming, but it's not hard. If you take your time, I think you'll do fine with it. That's all I got for now, guys. We'll talk to y'all later.